Most of classical music starts on an upbeat in order to finish conclusively, emphatically on a downbeat. Ta 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 ta, ta 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 ta. It is very different with the late Romantic Russian music in the 19th century, perhaps based on the language of the spoken Russian by the composers, where the emphasis is on the first syllable, Боже мой, как такой? Ta-ta-ta, ta-ta-ta. Whenever if you hear French, it sounds musically ta-ta-ta-ta, ta-ta-ta-ta. Je voudrais vous dire, comment allez-vous? Bonjour. So, German music seems to be in classical music through the centuries the music. Nobody even calls it German. You just name the composers from Pachelbel to Schoenberg, and you pass through the whole list of Haydn, Beethoven, Mozart, okay, Austrian, but still, Brahms, Schumann before, and Mendelssohn in between, and then lists more Germanic than Hungarian, really, or Austro-Hungarian. And the unity of the continuum of the German music is also built on the upbeat. Do, re, mi, fa, re, mi, do, sol, do, si, do, re. The first invention by Bach, or the 40th Symphony by Mozart. Mi, re, mi, re, mi, re, si, la, sol, sa, fa, mi, re, do. It doesn't mean that the downbeat is heavier or accented. It just means you rebound on it to go to the next upbeat and then create this perpetual motion in a way of rebounding pulses, like Bach's 4/16 notes a beat in solo violin, in inventions with two voices on the keyboard, or organ works, or choral works, or cantatas, or masses, or passions. At every dimension of the scope of the oeuvres, you have this elemental, almost Lego brick style 4/16 notes a beat pattern that you can see in every photocopy of manuscript of Bach, slightly carved. And in fact, they correspond to the beats. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4 if you had 4 beats. But the way the patterns of the design of the 16th notes elements, would it be gestures, intervals, steps, patterns of reproducing steps by sequences. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 becomes 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4, 1. And you maintain it rolling. That's kind of perpetual motion of sorts. But Western music is also based on not only pulse, but on harmony. And the harmony establishes the tonality through the tension of the dominant with the leading tone embedded in its third. And so you have a tritone dissonance that begs for a resolution closing, that is the tritone between the leading tone and the subdominant. In C major, it would be G, and then B and F, or Sol, and C and Fa. And C and Fa closes to Do Mi. And so you go from the dominant to the tonic, you establish your tonality. Now, each of the dominant tonic baseline rapport of dominant to tonic fifth, melodically speaking, gesture, perfect fifth, not major nor minor, that's why we call it perfect in French, juste, or right, but is opposite to the sixth, of course, or the seventh, that can be major or minor. So this is more about gestures of cardinal motions between essential degrees of the hierarchy of the tonality that emanate from the circle of fifths. Fa, do, sol, re, la, mi, si, or F, C, G, D, A, E, B. For instance, and then you cannot sing that range because it's too wide. So you stress it into step motion of C, D, E, F, G, A, B, which is in fact two tetrachords, tone, tone, semitone in major symmetrically, which are obtained by jumping over one of the fifths of the circle of fifths. F, you jump C, go to G, you jump D, you go to A, F, G, A, B, C. And you have a step motion, and that scale is the step motion, and the step motion's fifth degree is the dominant, which dominates because it defines the tonality by holding the tension of the system, that is the release of the dominant to the tonic, the semitone of the leading tone, or in French, note sensible, sensitive tone, that leads to the tonic. Inevitably, therefore, this magnet to the tonic explains it, and therefore, if you complete a tonality by finishing on the downbeat with the tonic, harmonically, you have to be just preceding it by a dominant, or perhaps if you're in a church setting, the subdominant, which is a cadence that is slightly less tense release, since there is no tension in the subdominant because it has common tones, F, A, C, C, E, G, or Fa, La, Do, Do, Mi, Sol. It's often called the Amen cadence or the plagal cadence because it concludes the Mass. That is go in peace without tension, because you're in harmony with the spiritual uplifting. When you have the dominant and the tritone, you have tension, you have passion, you have delay resolution, you have expectation to arrive to that downbeat, which would be the conclusion, either temporary or final of the piece in terms of the punctuation of the phrase, in terms of the contextual organization of the notes. After all, like letters, words through syllables, and then sentences into phrases within chapters organized by paragraphs. You have syntax in the order of the words, the action, the subject, the complement, the adjective. In the same way, you can say that there are connections, therefore, between the upbeat and the downbeat, with the dominant and the tonic, the inhale and the exhale. And that dominant, tonic. Which is why when you start on the tonic, or in any degree on the downbeat, you finish on the upbeat. That doesn't mean necessarily, but this is the idea of the motion. So in the Russian music that revived the classical musical language in the 19th century, that was in Western Europe, developing through polyphony after Renaissance already centuries before. I think just like the German language shaped the composer's musical expression. Now we speak about music without lyrics, so it doesn't have to do with the words themselves. But these artists like Schumann, who was drunk with literature, in imagination, in music of the words, in the Germanism, the pan-Germanism of the language, the first one to indicate the score with the German markings versus the traditional Italian because of the opera, the work, the original form of all forms put together to create an artwork, sang and acted and played. And it was nowhere, no matter where in Europe, Italian, because it was invented in Italy. And so the usage of the terminology, piano, legato, allegro, andante, adagio, da capo, were all Italian, but Schumann decided they'll be German for his music, langsam instead of lento. and even markings of drive. For instance, he loved to read, again, his literature connection, Johannes Kreisler, the character of E.T.A. Hoffman, who he identified with, this kind of fantastic character that was uplifted or daydreaming, the Eusebius and the Florestan that he nicknamed his own two soul dualities. Yeah, it was really fantastic to imagine that at the first movement, which is the get-go without introduction of the first piece of the Kreisteriana's piano pieces that are imitative of the different actions and characters, personalities of facets of the personalities of Johannes Kreisler. Aus erst bewegt. That's what Schumann writes on the top of the notes. At the get-go, driven. At the get-go, in motion. Not pick up, just right away. And you could say that the syntax in German is organized so that the verb, the action, comes last. So you have, depending on how long the sentence is in terms of literature, you have a listener, reader eagerness to know if this action is present, past, or future, but you don't know until you finish the sentence. Whenever, for instance, in French, the subject, the verb, and the complement comes at the end. So therefore, the subject, the verb is in the middle. You can say, home I go, or I go home. Of course, these are very short words, but in music, when you hear Schumann's syncopated pulse, delaying harmonizations that arrive slightly offbeat compared to the melody, but in a continuous lagging, creates a sense of longing, which is so much the essence of the 19th century German Romanticism. The longing for what? For exultance, or perhaps for relief, and perhaps even daydream. But nevertheless, even in slow motion, not only in fast movements, you have this sense of waiting for the action to be determined. Is it present, future, or past? And I'm very deeply convinced that people who live intensely their language, in terms of the literature of their language, in Russian, in German, in French, in Italian, it shapes, in any other language, it shapes your mentality of how you think about your rapport to nature, to people, to boredom, to excitement, to delivery, to expectation, to longing. And this departure of the music on the downbeat, like Rachmaninoff's concerto, do, re, do, si, la, si, sol, do, re, mi, re, do. Okay, it doesn't have to be accented. It can be just stated, do, re, do, si, la, si, sol. But you wouldn't do that, as I said earlier, in the 40th Symphony. Mi, re, si, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do. Mozart is ta-da-da, ta-da-da, ta-da-da. Beethoven is ta-ta-ta-ta, ta-ta-ta-ta. So most of the Western music, which developed a lot in the Germanic lands, but not only, but mostly, and in a continuum, even if you went from Renaissance to Baroque to early classic to early romantic to postmodern to atonal, you have this continuum of German composers writing music in terms of the structure, the organization of the phrases, the structure of the lines, the organization of the harmonic language that is there to support the pulse. And of course, if you have an aria of a song, opera, mass, cantata, then inevitably you adjust the music downbeat to the accent in the word. So if the word's accent is at the end of the syllable, you start a beat to finish downbeat with the arrival of the word in terms of the syllable. Now, of course, you can switch it around. That happens very often in modern music of rap when adapted to foreign languages that have tonic accent in their words in their spoken language at the end, but because the pulse, the beat of the rap is on the downbeat, then they change the accentuation of the spoken word. So they basically adapt the word to the pulse. Whenever most of the songs, music for church or for opera in classical music, the pulse adapted to the word. And equally, Russian opera with the downbeats for the words, in this case, the lyrics. Or in both cases, let's say Schumann and Mussorgsky, without lyrics. You hear how, like in Mussorgsky's pictures and exhibition, you have movements that start on the downbeat, like Tuileries, or Limoges. Now, of course, when I solfege for you the pieces, perhaps because I want so much to emphasize the difference of pulse with the upbeat and downbeat departing on the beat, I accent the downbeats. And that is not right, because it could be effective if it's something even Beethoven loves doing that with sforzando markings, a way to spice the line with spikes. But I think it's a natural fact that you start with an exhaling ta 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 instead of inhaling ta ta ta. So to a certain extent, perhaps I overplay the importance that I associate in the creators of music and their mother tongue literature, spoken music words in their exchanges, their writings, their spoken exchanges, and the music they compose with or without lyrics. Perhaps it's not 100% always aligned. There are Russian music that can start on the upbeat, and there are Western music that start on the downbeat. But in both cases, they're really very rare. And for whichever reason that is the case, the harmonic progression that is associated, because they are dominants and tonics, okay, if it's more modal with a flat 7 instead of leading 7 semitone to the tonic attraction, then it's more a descending mode as the ancient modes used to be. Therefore the flat 7 goes to 6 instead of leading tone going up. So if you go up with the flat 7, you use the modal as a fake tonal, because in fact the leading tone has to be semitone to the tonic. If not, it's not a leading tone. If it's a full tone, then it's less tense, it's less dominant, it's less leading tone, it's less not sensible in French, sensitive tone. But some of the music that's on the downbeat is often modal, with flat 7 instead of sharp 7 degree within the scale. But I think that from my experience of musical expression, the melody, the gestural intervals that express leaps or delays to suspensions or appoggiaturas, creating a dissonant to be released into the consonants or affects that spice, if not perfume, if you prefer, perhaps, or bring an extra element of, if it's not only ornamentation, I think it's a psychological enhancement of the sentence. If you just go to the point, you'll say ta ta. But if you go ta ta ta, it's already an appoggiatura. Ta 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 ta. Then you have the gesture of the sixth going down to the fifth before the tonic. Ta 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 ta. And the leap of the sixth is more emotional because it's minor. Or ta 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 if it's major. But if it's just ta ta, it's a perfect fourth, like the perfect fifth inversion. It's nor major nor minor, so you don't introduce emotion, you only function with something very clear, the dominant and the tonic. Tum pa pa, pum pum pa to, tum pum pa to, tum pum pa to. You delay the ta by the ta, leading tone ta, third, ta, minor third ta, but there. And the first ballade by Chopin, he goes da da dee da da do, do re fa si la sol. He could say do re mi fa sol, or he could say do re mi fa la sol, and go around, or do re mi fa si la sol, extra around, F sharp leading tone to G, avoiding the G right away from the leading tone's tension to go to it, magnetically delaying it by leaping to the minor third, F sharp B, which is an interval gesture of a diminished fourth. By itself, it's a tension interval. And then finally, you drop by steps, la, and full tone, sol. And so you have do, re, fa, si, la, sol. Instead of having do, re, mi, fa, sol. And you could say modern music is more about facts, just like modern architecture is more about practicality. No need to organize ornamentations or display embellishments or organized emotional effects of delaying the melodic line with an extra note that would be an appoggiatura suspension. That is possible, and I think aesthetically that's what tends to become until tonal system through its melodic line, harmonic organization, and the pulse structure of beat downbeat literally exploded with atonality or post-tonality through serial organization of tones of your own choice, and then the inherited centuries of tension release, of tone, semitone, of dominant tonic, or different patterns of degree progressions in order to reach the tonic, even by delay tactics as the deceptive cadences, or cadence rompue in French, broken cadence, instead of 5-1 for the perfect cadence in the melodic line of the bass line, you do 5-6, which has two of the three common tones of the triad, that is C and E, except G because it's over the A. So you have the melody having the leading tone to the tonic, just like when you end with the tonic in the bass. But if you delay, you go ta-dum, ta-dum, and you have a delay tactic before you finish. Again, with the perfect cadence mostly. But in atonal, post-tonal music, where you don't have hierarchies between the tones, you don't have tension and releases, dissonances and consonances, you just have organization of sounds that seem to float in the air, and they acquire their own meaning once you read it mostly first, and then comprehend it and start emotionally reacting to it. But you have to acquire it just like you acquire a foreign language. If you want to appreciate the innuendos of a love poem in Japanese, for instance, if you don't speak it, you have to first learn the language in order to be able to fully not only pronounce but comprehend the diphthongs and the sounds and the meanings of the words, or in any language that you don't speak. So ultimately, you should just learn the language of each composer that's atonal. And those who are tonal, even with alterations of the tonality, are reasonable, guessable, discoverable, rediscoverable if they were forgotten by history, because there is a communality of the language, even individuality in the expression, but something was shared more than individualized. And when you make up your own alphabet, your own sounds, your own phonemes, and then you organize the whole piece around it, then in order to appreciate it, you have to learn it. If not, you're lost in front of it, at least at the listening level. If you can read it, you start understanding better what you observe of the patterns. But then again, at that level, classical music loses its readability, universal readability by aficionados, when you lose the basic grammar rules and you basically bomb the sentences and you start hearing just sounds, not even syllables, and you don't know if they carry a meaning or they're just aesthetically on their own. And it's not necessary to find a meaning. It's just like in modern painting in the 20th century, when people did no more figurative paintings. That is a little bit the equivalent. The atonality is the non-figurative music. And it has poetry within itself, just more difficult to appreciate at the get-go unless you have an acquired taste for it. And therefore the upbeat, downbeat matters way less because it's no more part of the language through which you vehicle concepts and phonemes and sounds and melodic lines and evocations of tension or release. Or if it's, let's say, film music, you create an enhancement of the psychological situation, and you don't use it unless you use chords and harmonic progressions that or single chord that signal the spookiness, if it is, or the disappointment or the expectation. In other words, it's a language on its own, music, but it's also a language that talks directly to our psyche when we can connect to it for the recognizable effects that we receive from it. If it's sad or happy at the very basic, uneducated level, but if it's bittersweet, or if it's nostalgic, if it's driven with its major halfway and minor halfway, the major third with a minor sixth, a smile with a tear. In fact, in subtle ways, and people who are not grammatically aware of classical music because they didn't learn it like a foreign language, like you do in school for a foreign language, where you go through grammar and syllables and syllabus, and you read a vocabulary and you organize sentences and you understand how they place the organization of the thoughts in order to express themselves as a native. If you do the same thing in music, you can read the score on your own. You don't even need anybody to play it for you. But if the music is becoming so embedded in the image for a film, then at some point you don't even realize you're listening to the music. It talks to your subconscious. Well, the images too. In fact, everything is there to narrate your storytelling through all the immersive aspects of the storytelling, the language, the gestures, the pitches, the music, the action, the background, the choice of how you shape the image that you present and how you enhance it through the music, or provocatively with the music that is purposely not connecting or espousing the emotional storytelling. Sometimes art songs do that too. In French for the melody, in German for the lead, or in Russian. You also have poetry set in music, and the piano accompanying the singer sets the mood, but not necessarily imitating the mood. It's more as if it's complementing the mood for the immersion of the listener's imagination. And sometimes, thoughtfully, provocatively, the sad text could have some catchy piano part, and the catchy song can have is somehow distant music. It doesn't always have to mirror the words, and the sound mirroring the melodic line, or the words mirroring the harmonic progression that mirrors in turn the words. And then, yes, you have a unity of topic and pattern, with therefore upbeat, downbeat, or whatever it takes. But because there you speak the words, you say the words, you want to be understood, even if you can hold them on a vocalise, on a vowel, and say, ah, arriving. Of course, it's unnatural, but it's part of melodizing the vowels of the syllables to delay their arrival. But it makes it less comprehensible than if it's spoken. Because if I sing what I tell you, I distract you with the whichever intervals I chose to. And if I speak, it's to convey a thought. If I sing, I convey a thought with lyrics, but mostly a concept of a whole that is in one: the melody, the harmony, the pulse, the rhythm, the text. That's why pop music is so special for most people who are not musically, let's say, trained in classical music reading or awareness, is because they can detect it through the lyrics, and how the lyrics sit so well in the melodic line of a song accompanied on a guitar or band. Which is why very often non-classical music aficionados, when they go to a concert of classical music, they usually tell the performer after the concert, referring to the piece they heard, not knowing it or never heard it, or discovering it and possibly loving it, but it's not their usual musical daily companionship of this genre. They often refer to the song. I liked your song, even if you played an hour of piano music sonatas, which is by essence instrumental to us. But I understand why they say that, because music speaks to you with or without words, at least melodically. And I think the pulse with the upbeat, downbeat has to do a lot with it. And because most of the music is written before the performer who will play it will start reading it or playing it or reproducing it, because others played it and they want to play it also. They don't invent it, they don't improvise it, they don't make it up. So they reproduce something that exists from a document. And then when they play it, it appears to be on the spot, their own, which is what ultimately is the best. It's like actors saying their lines, so that you believe that they're really saying it instead of thinking they're reciting them. If you think so, you don't have the rupture of disbelief that they're acting, so the immersion is lost. And same thing in improvisation. Yes, you make it up. In interpretation, you recite it, but as if it was your own. And I find that to be very contagious when you hear how they delay some notes that are more meaningful than others because it's either a peak of a line. I could say, emphatically spoken, so good to see you today. So good to see you today. So good to see you today. So I could do it in moderato, in andante, with a lyrical, or with just factual. So good to see you today. But even with a little today or today or today, up, down, or middle. Or we don't have to sing what we speak. But the gestures in the intervals suggest it in music without lyrics, on the piano, let's say. And so the upbeat, downbeat is part of what the performers should take really in account, in my humble opinion, not as a given because it's a fact. They come after it was written from beginning to end and they just retake it from the beginning to the end to restate it. So they walk you through the journey of the piece as the composer imagined it, just like a writer wrote the theater play. And so you follow the events as they unfold. Or a screenplay writers in movies create a sense of your expectation, or they make you follow the story in a certain way that entices you. And this is very important in classical music too, and therefore because it's a given in the text, we often think not much about up and downbeat. If you're a chamber group or an orchestra or a conductor who doesn't play but beats, you have to give the upbeat before a downbeat, regardless if it starts on the downbeat or on the upbeat. Then you give a downbeat before the upbeat and then the upbeat. And if it starts on the downbeat, just the upbeat. But when you start playing by yourself on the piano, you don't give yourself an up-down beat. People might think you're a bit eccentric, like why is he conducting himself? Can he hear it in his head or count it in his head? 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4, 1. But the conductor doesn't play, the performers don't count. Most pianists don't. Therefore, the concept of the upbeat, downbeat compared to the pulse, independent of the tempo, if it's displayed slowly or if it's said very fast. And how fast is the articulation of the fingers for the pianist, is the tonguing on the wind players, is the, of course, length of breath exhaling for singers. Pianists don't breathe, but they articulate the sounds. And the music, more or less, on the instrumental presentation, does, at some levels, evoke singing, speaking, racing. That's usually the tempo, the speed. But it's also the patterns, if they're 6th note, or 8th notes, or combinations of all of them, of course, in polyphony even more. But music speaks to us at so many levels than one. And I think that performers should take in account how they bring to make you hear the opening of a piece, which starts with the silence before, and it will end with the silence after the piece. So there is silence interrupted by music. And if it's interrupted by a downbeat or an upbeat, you visualize it because you see the score, but the audience don't have usually the score. Now, you could have an audience with scores, but usually people don't read music in the audience. And even if they did, then they'll see that you don't play exactly what's written, which leads to other problems. But let's say they trust you as the cantor of the piece. And let's say you play the Beethoven Sonata Opus 109, and you play. You could think, because there is nothing before the first note, that you start on the downbeat. And Beethoven on the score makes it ambiguously start on an upbeat, but the downbeat is equal to the upbeats and the same patterns. So you don't know if he wants to start as if it's sort of floating. Is it up, down, downbeat, up? Or is it downbeat, downbeat? And does it really matter? Of course, it matters if there were syllables and words. I want to tell you, I want to tell you. And perhaps sometimes imaginary lyrics help when you play the piano to talk to yourself the piece. I use it with the notes do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do because it's easy to solfege quickly because of the consonants and vowels in the Italian denomination of the notes. So, fa, sol, do, la, sol, fa, mi, fa, sol, mi, fa, re, fa, mi, fa, sol, la, fa, sol, mi. I know it's silly, but it's easy. It's almost like speak it more than sing it. Mi, fa, re, mi, re, mi, re, mi, re, mi, do. It's harder to do with English because you have too many vowels. E, F, E, F, E, D, 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 C. I mean, it's possible, not natural to me. But the point of it is that, yes, we don't articulate, but by the fingers on the piano, not by the syllables, if we sang words, or if we played a wind instrument. But we still have a phrasing, a direction, an arching, a purpose, an apex of the line and a descent. Would it be a tension release? Would it be a climax and a downfall? Or just a continuous build-up? Whatever it is, it goes from one point to the other, and it carries you emotionally, psychologically as a listener. You take by the hand, so to say, the listener, and you bring them through your tempo, your phrasing, your articulation, your organization of the sounds, how you shape or sculpt the texture. And the upbeat, downbeat, I think it's very determining, not only for the rhythm, but also for the whole motion or setting in motion of the elements. It's fascinating. Thank you.